Good evening, welcome everybody. My name is Eric Wishart. I'm the Vice President of the Foreign Correspondents Club Hong Kong, and it's my great pleasure and honour and also personal delight to introduce Michael Palin, whose work I've followed since I was a kid, I think. I mean, as a member of Monty Python, he's a member of one of the most iconic comedy teams ever. So, and I was also a friend of the FCC, but beyond Monty Python, Flying Circus, and both the television shows and the films, he went on to do many great things. He won a BAFTA for Ken and A Fish Called Wanda, another extremely funny film I would recommend. He wrote and appeared in the films The Missionary, American Friends, and the television plays East of Ipswich and Number 27. He played Jim Nelson in Alan Bleasdale's GBH and has presented two great railway journey programs for the BBC. He's written books. He's a very prolific gentleman to accompany 8 successful travel series, including Around the World in 80 Days. And so we're going to have lots to talk about tonight. Jodi Schneider, our club president, will moderate this discussion with Michael. We're accepting questions, and the email is question at Jodi?
Question at fcchk.org.
Question at fcchk.org. So we'll have time for questions, so please don't be shy. This is a rare opportunity to ask Michael Palin all the questions you ever wanted to ask him. So I'll pass it to Jodi. Thank you.
Nothing about my tax affairs, please.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Sir Michael Palin, for doing this tonight.
Just call me sir.
Okay. You wouldn't believe the amount of attention we got when my favorite response was somebody just wrote an email. The subject line was, "You got Michael Palin, you rule," with 5 exclamation points.
Well, I hope it won't be a terrible disappointment.
It's helped our status in the world. And I do want to name check Basil Powell, who a club member and a photographer, who was a photographer for some of your books, for making this happen. One night at the bar here, we were talking about, once the Zoom event started taking off, who could we get? And Tim Huxley, our treasurer and good friend of Basil's, said, "Well, Basil, what about Michael Palin?" I said, "Michael Palin?" He goes, "Well, yeah, I shot his books." I'm like, "Okay, you're on. I dare you." So he delivered.
Well, I think it's highly appropriate that a suggestion came up at the bar, because Basil and I have propped up many bars right across the world, and he's a great traveling companion. We've had some wonderful times. Hi, Baz, if you're watching. If you're not, if you're at the bar, even better.
Well, he might be watching at the bar, actually. But first, tell us about you. Growing up, did you ever think you'd end up as a sir? Did you ever anticipate, doing what you've done, or any part of it? Were you funny as a kid?
Well, a lot of questions there. I mean, do you know what you're going to become later in life? The answer is no, really. It's just you look back and you think, well, what were your instincts then, and how similar are they to the way your life has turned out? And I just remember my childhood being a constant struggle between my own sort of generally mischievous, anti-authoritarian nature and my father's desire to get me into a respectable, well-paid job, so I didn't have to depend on him a minute longer than the end of my education. So there was this struggle, and I always felt that what I really wanted to do was something which people never did. It was, apart from the great script writers or the Milligans or people who wrote Hancock's Half Hour, who I sort of followed when I was young, but they were a different planet. I was from Sheffield. I would never be like them. So all I could hope for was just to kind of keep going and try and do, more performing, bit of acting at school and all that. Again, it was very difficult because my father was very much against it. And if he heard that I'd been acting, he'd have a word with the headmaster and say, "I don't think Michael should be doing this." So it was a bit of a struggle, but in the end, I suppose you could say I won.
So when did you really start thinking about, performing, writing comedy material? There's this famous story about you performing and writing at a university Christmas party with Robert Hewison, and the Terry
Yeah.
Jones saw that and began
Yeah.
writing with you and Hewison. Tell us what that was like and when you first kind of got that spark.
Well, that was really when I went to university. I went to Oxford in 1962 and fell in with someone who's become a great friend, Robert Hewison, a journalist himself. And he and I loved the work of Pete and Dud and Spike Milligan and the Goon Show. And we would recite their scripts and all that together. And Robert, who was more metropolitan than I was, came from London and lived just near the King's Road. And I came from Sheffield, where we hadn't even, we didn't even know what pizza was. So it was a kind of mix, but Robert said, look, let's get some cabaret together. Instead of just telling jokes to each other, we'll tell them to an audience, and we can get paid for it. And indeed, I said, this is crazy. But he said, no, I'll get you a booking. And he got us this wonderful booking, which was the Oxford University Psychological Society Christmas party in 1962. And we went along and we did our half hour of comedy to a totally silent room. They were completely silent. But at the end, one of them came up and said, that was very, very interesting. So they were all psychologists. So we said, oh, fine. But then, yes, then I got became friendly with Terry Jones, who was not only a very good actor, but also very funny as well, and a lovely companion. So the three of us together gradually did more and more comedy. You do cabarets around Oxford. I can remember going to the Oxford University Conservative Association annual dance, which was held at Blenheim Palace, would you believe? Home of the Duke of Marlborough. We turn up and they say, would you go around the back, please? Where the cabaret, please go around the back with the plumbers. I went into a tiny room, which is just full of other people's coats and shoes and all that. And that's where we had to wait until we were given our moment. So there were lots of things we did which were funny in circumstances which were quite funny. And just rounded off when I in 1964 I was chosen along with Terry to be in the Oxford University Review at the Edinburgh Festival, and there we had to write and perform our own material, not just to our friends at Oxford but the outside world, all the people who'd come to Edinburgh. And it was considered a very good show, and we did extra shows and all that. And it was then that I had the merest first inkling that perhaps I could make people laugh for a living. But it was just, it was on the edge there. But certainly that Edinburgh Festival '64 was a big turning point.
And so Monty Python didn't come right away, right? There was the comedy show Now, and work with Terry Jones with the BBC on the Ken Dodd Show, Billy Cotton Road Show, and Illustrated Weekly HUD, and then the Frost Report. And tell us about that and the Frost Report, working with John Cleese, Eric Idle, Graham Chapman, and how this led to Monty Python.
Well, the Frost Report was very, very important to us because it was a new show. It was, I think it started in 1965, 66. We'd just come out of university. David Frost had been up to the Edinburgh Festival, had seen our show. And to his great credit, he was a good sort of, headhunter, and he found out if he liked what people had written, he'd find out and get in touch with them. And he asked us to be one of the writing teams on the Frost Report. I mean, there were a huge number of writers, people all over, from all kind of backgrounds. All the comedy writers sort of gathered together for this half-hour show and fought and competed to get their material in. And whilst we were doing that, we met two very funny writers from Cambridge, John Cleese and Graham Chapman. Also another very funny guy who was more my own age, Eric Idle. He was one of the team there. So we all sort of knew each other, And we also got to know some of the older writers who would give us very good advice as to what to do and you know, how to keep going in the business. The pay was very, very low, but it was the status of the show was quite considerable. So it was quite a useful thing to do. And that led, first of all, to myself, Eric Idle and Terry Jones writing a show called Do Not Adjust Your Set. It was for children. It went out about 5:15 in the afternoon. And it was watched by children and Italian waiters. We loved that because we would go to Italian restaurants and the waiters would say, "Hey, we love your show. You're so funny. You're so funny." You know, because they were just getting into their gear for the evening at 5:15. They couldn't watch any television in the evening, but they could watch it at 5:15. So it was Italian waiters and, and young children, and they were successful. And then, cut a long story short, about 1969, John Cleese rang and said he'd seen the sort of things we were doing. They were quite funny. Let's try and do something together. And that was early 69 when Python was mooted, and you know, we pushed ahead with it.
Great. Well, you know, many of us and many people watching are still obsessed with Monty Python. Even some of us Americans, we get it, or we try.
No, we owe America a great debt because the Americans discovered Python quite late on. It went out on PBS in 1974. We'd all given up hope of it ever going across to the States. And it really caught on. It caught on amongst the student sort of population and all that around the various colleges and universities. And you gave Python, you know, a real new lease of life. It was
Yeah,
great.
We're a little late, but you know, eventually we get it.
No,
What was the process? Was it a collaborative thing? Did you split things up? Did things just come up? Like, for instance, a lumberjack song, which we all love. How did that come about?
Well, what happened was there were writing groups within the main group, and I remained writing with Terry Jones, and John and Graham wrote together, and Eric wrote on his own, and Gilliam did his own thing. And Terry and I were writing one day. We got onto a sketch about a kind of homicidal, blood-crazed barber who was given all these very, very sharp instruments, and clearly was a psychopath. But the man sitting there was just in front, couldn't see all this, and just saying, "Oh, it's a lovely day," and all that. And he was cutting. Had to control himself, and it was quite funny. But then we thought, we've got to stop this. Where on earth do we go with that? And the thing about Python is not that we'd write a sketch and then put it in. You'd try and link it into something else, or you'd take the character out of the sketch into another sketch. And so we just came up with the guy saying, "Oh, yeah, I didn't want to do this anyway. You know, I wanted to be a lumberjack." I don't know where it came from. It's something in my head. And off it went. And the sketch had taken a day to write. And the lumberjack song took about 15 minutes to write the entire thing. So there you go.
I mean, was it as much fun as it looked like? Was it crazy? You know, just this. I mean, you hear sometimes people talk about, you know, famous bands collaborating, and that it was great fun, and then it wasn't. Or was it fun the whole time?
Yes, it was a great, wonderful show to do because everybody had their own particular talents, and they're very strong writing talents and performing. That was the wonderful thing. Within the group of 6 of us, we could almost do everything. We even had 2 film directors. I mean, we had a director of the series, but the 2 Terrys were very keen on the visual look and all that. Terry Gilliam's work was incredibly important because it was real breakthrough. No other television show had ever used animation the way Terry used it. Fantastic work. So we had many things going for us, many strengths. And whilst those produced the goods, it was all fine. By the time we'd done the second series, I think the material was perhaps a little more difficult to to come by. John had decided that he wanted to work more on something different. He felt Python had run its course after the second series, but we did the third series together. And then without John, the rest of us did a 4th series, which is actually quite funny. Not not because John wasn't there, but it's kind of generally written off, not proper Python, but I thought there's some very funny stuff there. You know, it was good till it became slightly repetitive. And we were we were real perfectionists. We wanted everything to be really funny and really different. And we wanted the presentation and the look of it to be different. When it became repetitive, I think there was a feeling that perhaps the best times were over. But then we made the transition into making the films, and that suddenly there was something fresh, brought us all back together again. So when we were actually working and producing comedy, we were so happy. I mean, it was a very good time for everybody, because that's what humor does for you. You know, if you're sharing a humor and doing things which are really, really making people laugh, then you couldn't do it with a better bunch than the Pythons. Really, it was a fantastic group to be part of.
And why do you think it endures? Why, this is something that, generations of fans, when we said we were having you tonight, it wasn't just, people older like us. I mean, there were people, young people
Yeah.
who knew about, and so why, it really, it has endured. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think for a start, Python was never topical. It went really for the absurdity of life generally, and the general absurdity of human behavior, and particularly the sort of pretentiousness of human behavior. And that hasn't really changed. The sort of politicians we had to go at, or the police we had to go at, or the church or whatever, they're still there. There are still people who think they have a divine right to, so I shouldn't say divine, but they have a right to tell everybody else how to behave. And I think there was just a streak of anti-authoritarianism in all the Pythons, which is very, very similar to a child's view of the world. Children have to learn to be told what to do. Naturally, they're freer spirits, and I think we were free spirits, and I think that's why Python's sort of silliness, looking at the world and seeing it as a very, very silly place, strikes a real chord with the younger generations.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that it wasn't so topical, so that people, it didn't seem like it failed to hold up anymore.
No, I mean that's a big part of it. Yeah.
Do you stay in touch over the years? Have you kept in touch with the others and help each other out through your careers? I know it must have been very hard when Terry Jones died last year. You wrote something lovely on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so, are you all in touch?
We do keep in touch. I wouldn't say we help each other with our careers. Usually, if I don't know what was the Gore Vidal comment, when one of my friends has a success, a little part of me dies. It's great, and we're all a bit competitive. Oh dear, I'm sorry, didn't tell as well. So we do keep in touch. We have to keep in touch primarily for contracts and sales, and Python still being around. There are various bits of paper to be signed and decisions to be made about how we sell the programs. But we're also, I think we're all good friends still. Basically, deep down, when we get together and we make each other laugh, that's the thing that has gone right through the 50 years we've been working together. It doesn't mean that we have different ideas about how things should be done and how people have different lifestyles. Eric lives in America and has a very sort of American West Coast sort of lifestyle. John seems to be continually avoiding the inland revenue. So, we have a laugh about each other, but I wouldn't say, the great thing is we are all different, and that's what was so important. If we'd all come from exactly the same point of view, the show would not have been as good. Everybody had their own particular strengths.
That's great. Well, let's move on to your film career. After Monty Python ended in 1974, there's quite a lot of it. I have this whole stack of of your filmography and documentaries. You both wrote Time Bandits with Terry Gilliam, The Missionary, and acted A Private Function, Fierce Creatures, and of course, The Fish Called Wanda, for which you won a BAFTA for Best Supporting Actor. What are your favorites? And what was it like also to act in films that you also wrote? That seems like that could be a little complicated.
Well, I suppose when you look back at Python, what happened was that generally the parts were distributed so that if you had written a particular sketch, you would be you would take the main part in it. This just seemed to be the easiest way to do it. So performing one's own material was something which we learnt on Python. So I was quite glad to, in The Missionary, which I wrote as well as I was in, I was quite glad to be there in the central position, because you can then sort of gauge how everybody else plays around you and all that, and try and get the comedy right. It's better if you're actually in there. And I realized, and Terry Jones used to say this, he said, Mike, that's trouble. You always, if you're not very careful, you get there in the middle, you're the straight man, you know, all the others are having much more fun. So in The Missionary, we had sort of people like Maggie Smith and Denham Elliott playing outrageous characters, and Trevor Howard and all those. And I was sort of a bit the fall guy in the middle. But I think it was important to do that. And I was very pleased with most of how it turned out. A lot of what I feel about work and working is you've got to have control to the point where if you've written something, you must make sure it goes into exactly the right hands, the right actor to play the material. It doesn't always work. And when we did The Ripping Yarns, Terry Jones and myself, because we didn't want to just emulate Python, we had these storylines, and we would get in actors, very good actors, people from straight theatre and all that, to play the roles. And sometimes they were brilliant, and other times they just didn't get how to play the humour. And I realised that Python always got it. You never had to explain to any of the Pythons how something was funny. The pauses, the look, the makeup, the costume, everything, you know, people could be trusted to do the funniest thing. And so it didn't always work. And I felt that with some of my films as well, that it was quite hard to get to reproduce what Python had.
Do you go back and watch your films or watch Python now?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
I watch gloomy Scandinavian dramas where people get murdered and stuffed into deep freezers and all that. That's my entertainment.
What was your favorite film to make? Was it A Fish Called Wanda?
Well, I think my favorite film to make, I think, would probably have been The Life of Brian, because it was very funny. I think we all had great parts to play. It was done in the warmth of Tunisia. It was very comfortable, unlike the Holy Grail, where it rained and was damp and your chainmail got very soggy. But it was lovely and cool in the breeze in Tunisia. So I think that would be, in a way, my favorite film. But then they're all different. I very much enjoyed the two films I did with Maggie Smith, because acting with Maggie is a bit like acting with Cleese or someone like that. Absolutely spot on timing. They know exactly what to do. And it's just wonderful to act with someone who just plays the comedy so naturally. So A Private Function would be quite high on my list, which was written by Alan Bennett. And it's all about sort of the period after the war when people were, there's a lot of black market butchering going on. And it's the story of how a pig is, we get to kill a pig. But that was great.
Leaving films, I want to talk, before we talk about travel and some other things, you've had a long and varied collaboration with the BBC early in your career, but then with the travel documentaries. And the role of the public broadcaster, including here in Hong Kong with RTHK, is somewhat under threat. And there's always the funding issues. How important do you think it is to have something like the BBC that can take financial risk? And could you have done some of these things if it wasn't for something like the BBC?
Well, the answer is I don't think we would have done Python without the BBC. I don't think anyone else would would have put it on. And at the time, of course, the BBC was all powerful at that time. There was really only ITV and BBC Two. There were very few other channels. So the BBC could take risks and take gambles, which it did really with Python. It was able to say, I don't think the people at the BBC liked Python particularly or wanted to do it. They just said, oh, well, it sounds quite fun. It's got John Cleese in it. We like him. Let's do it late on a Saturday night, when no one will be watching or whatever. We won't have to be embarrassed. And we were left to get on with it. And now that's just would not happen now. I've been working with the BBC more recently, and there is much more supervision. They want to know what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, the various boxes you have to tick, what you can and what you can't say. I have issues with the way shows are presented now. So you have to, at the beginning of each episode, you have to see, the last 10 minutes or something of the last one or whatever, so nothing can be just left to its own devices. Everything has to be very much structured so that you don't lose the audience. That's a terrible thing, to lose the audience. But then, there are so many alternatives now for people to choose. But just briefly, I would say the BBC is extremely important and does extremely good work. And I think it always gets sort of, if anything goes slightly wrong or someone does something wrong at the BBC, there are a vested interests who will jump on that. People who don't want the BBC to be successful, don't like the BBC, want to see it broken up, and they want to take over, themselves. I won't say who they are, but big companies run the media. So BBC is under threat, and I think it still does an amazingly good job. But there are other channels that also produce extremely good programs. And I've worked for Channel 4 on GBH, and my journey to North Korea was from Channel 5, one of the smaller channels in the UK, and we had a very good working relationship there. So the BBC isn't the only show in town. What I think it has to be is just much more sort of bullish about itself, and realize that you pay £155 a year for subscription to all the radio channels, 4 television channels. Whereas, if I invest in another company, sort of Apple, Sky, whatever, the money just adds up every month. I suddenly look, oh God, I've spent sort of 60 quid this month just keeping in with a website I don't particularly want, or a sort of market I want. So I think BBC is good value for money.
We get a question kind of related to this, some questions from Eric Wishart, Harvey Simowitz, and Ray Radowski about political correctness and so-called cancel culture. What do you think of this modern day trend toward political correctness? The Life of Brian, was banned in cinemas across Britain in 1979, and in Ireland and Norway for allegedly being blasphemous. How has comedy been affected by this push? And are there red lines that even comedians should not cross?
I find that so difficult. You've just got to get ad hoc instances. Generally speaking, I think comedy should be free. It's an exercise of free speech. It's almost more important than anything else, comedy, because it allows you, by doing something which is not directly commenting on what's happening, to make a point, to put across a point, to put across some criticism in a way which is sort of much more effective than sometimes going head on. So I think that comedy is about the human condition, the human situation, the way we all are. If we can take ourselves so seriously that we can't be laughed at, then I think we're in real trouble. And I know this happens. There are a lot of people who think, well, you shouldn't laugh about this, you shouldn't laugh about that. And I think you just have to, if you're a writer in comedy or a performer in comedy, you have to take your own stand somewhere. And you have to say, I'm not going to make jokes about this or that. or if I'm going to make jokes, the jokes have to be jokes that make people laugh, not in an angry or a sort of violent way, but just show sort of self-awareness and how comical we really all are. And then I think that would be, I always used to say, when we were doing the Iraq War, someone asked what my thoughts were. I said we should be parachuting in comedians rather than sort of military. And I think in many ways, it's comedy is really about sociability. It's about bringing people together and all that. Whereas I think too often in the world, people are doing things to keep each other apart. So, I would say use it wherever possible.
Related to that, we John Cleese has taken some flack recently for some comments on Twitter. And I understand, by the way, you don't have a Twitter account, and not Michael Palin is truly not you. So
No, it isn't me.
oh, it is you. Oh, it is you. All right. We thought it was not. We thought it was, and we thought it wasn't. Okay, but it's you.
No, it isn't me.
Oh, it's not you. It's not
It's
you.
not
Okay.
me. No, not Michael Palin. It's not me.
Michael Palin. It's not you. Okay, that's clear.
Yeah.
Anyways, he was accused of making some transphobia kind of comments after joking about a Cambodian policewoman in tweets that supported author J.K. Rowling, who of course has been blasted over her controversial remarks on transgender people. Do you think this is fair, or is it an area where comedians should be able to speak out and people should kind of take it or leave it if they don't like it? Or do you think this is, this whole cancel culture, because this is related to what we were talking about political correctness?
Well, I can't really add much more than what I've just said. I think comedians should be able to speak out. I think comedy is perhaps sometimes the best way to say the hardest things. Good.
And we have a question from Peter Stein, who says he's a huge fan, as many people do when they write their questions, by the way. And was there any negative feedback Python received that upset or surprised you back in the day?
Well, I suppose really the negative feedback was concentrated on the life of Brian. I mean, before that, there were just people who liked Python and people who didn't like Python, which I was absolutely, totally happy about. They didn't pick out particular things. But on the life of Brian, we did, we were criticized for making a film about with the Bible story or the Bible times. But I think we'd been quite careful when we made the film to make quite sure that we showed that Brian was not Jesus. And we did that by actually having a character on the Sermon on the Mount where you saw Jesus, and it made it quite clear in the birth of Jesus at the beginning that they got the wrong person. So but we did have to defend quite hard against those who just said, well, this is just cheap jokes at the expense of people who have religious sensibilities, which it wasn't at all. And in fact, for every one of we did an interview, John and I, with a bishop in 1979, and they just said things like, I hope you make your 30 pieces of silver and all that. It was a horrible, ugly moment, really. Ugly, I think, for the church, not for us. They just dismissed the film and said it's worthless and showed off. But at the same time, we had people showing the film to their congregation, and you would have vicars and clergymen who would say, there is something in here we must learn, and here's the film, let's talk about it. It's the start of a discussion. And I think that made up for the flack that we got. But Python was never, it's very hard to sort of focus criticism on. It was all sorts of different things, we were hard to pin down where we were offensive, but with the life of Brian, they tried.
Well, I love that idea of them showing it in the churches. Moving away from this, I want to talk about travel, and so much of the latter part of your career has been focused on travel as a travel writer and travel documentarian, including earlier this year in the 4-part BBC series, Michael Palin Travels of a Lifetime. And when you look back on your on this part of your career, what sticks out to you? What are some of the more memorable travels, that places that if you could, you would go to again, or places that you'd like to tell the story of more in a broader sense?
We were fortunate to cover so much of the world. There were certain places that had been so significant to me when I was young, and I was keen on geography, and I was keen on maps, and I was keen on books that were set in different parts of the world when I was growing up in Sheffield. Partly, I think, because I saw the outside world as something, it was escapist. I never thought I would leave Sheffield because people didn't travel in the 1940s and 50s in the way they do now. So I suppose some of the great moments were crossing the Sahara, making a series about the Himalaya, going to places like Cape Horn, the North Pole, the South Pole, really sort of places that meant a lot to me when I was studying geography, and were sort of in most cases rather exciting when we actually went there. But what was the most rewarding thing about the journeys, I think, was meeting the people along the way. And when I was young, and I didn't really leave the country till I was 19 or 20, and I was always nervous of traveling because I didn't know other languages. A little bit of French I'd learned at school, but I wasn't naturally fluent in languages. And sadly, I'm still not. But I thought, well, this will preclude me traveling around the world, especially when we did Around the World in 80 Days, which is a long journey through many different countries. And yet I found actually, especially on Around the World in 80 Days, that there are ways in which you can create contact with others, share ideas, share experiences. It may be through humor, maybe a bit of slapstick humor. It may be because you're talking about each other's children, things like that, eating food together. That actually these are just as strong as the language itself. People generally, the people I met wanted to make contact. They wanted to welcome us. They wanted to be hospitable. They wanted to know about us. So it wasn't, that the world was sort of a closed door which you had to prise open. Quite the opposite. And that was one of the great joys of traveling, was to be able to talk to people in a Tibetan yurt, while helping the wife make butter or something like that, or sort of in Southern Africa in a schoolroom, in a very poor community, talking to them about the world and blowing up my inflatable globe and playing football with it. It was, there are moments where you can make communication with others and realize that there's more you share than divides you.
And Michael Palin, in North Korea, we have a question. Well, actually, several questions along this topic from Richard Casca and Stephen Tennant. And how do you feel when you look back at that? Do you think it was a sanitized version of North Korea, or do you think just doing something on this to get people thinking and talking about North Korea was important in breaking down some of the unknowingness, I guess, of the place?
Yes.
Some place most people have not been.
Yes, I mean, I went to South Korea when we did a Full Circle journey in 1996, and we looked across the border on the DMZ at North Korea, and the American troops with us said, these are the enemy. These are awful people over there. You're lucky to be living here, right? Okay, be lucky now. And so it was rather, I thought, come on, it's got to be better than that. And I said, one day I must go and have a look. And that's been the key to a lot of the traveling I've done, is just to learn for myself what a place feels like. Now, when you go to North Korea, you undoubtedly have to trade your total freedom just for the chance to have a look at the country. You're not going to be allowed to go where you might be in, you know, in the West, in America or Britain or something like that, you will have people with you who are checking on where you're going. But I don't think that's a reason not to go. I think you have to be quite intelligent about it. And we had 2 weeks there with a film crew, which is very, very rare. To allow a Western film crew in North Korea for 2 weeks is quite something. So that in itself was a start. And then you have to try and keep the pressure up to see normal life rather than just lots of the sites, the memorials, the statues and all that. You want to let them know you want to see more than that. And we found that we had generally won the trust of the people who were with us. There were very absolute strict limits as to what they could show and couldn't show us. But on the other hand, there was something of a dialogue. We did sort of prise the door open a little way. And all I can say is that my feeling about North Korea when I left wasn't that it was a horror show and that people lived at the point of a gun and were told what they could and couldn't do. It just wasn't like that. Maybe I'd missed it completely, and maybe my entire crew had missed it. But all of us felt that we had established just a slight sort of feeling of human connection that we could build on if we went there another time. We did get to know them. They got to know us. They were more honest with us by the end or more open with us. Sorry, not honest. More open with us by the end than they would have been at the beginning. But so I was very glad we went. What it's actually, done for them, I don't know. The real problem about North Korea is it exists in a bubble. They don't want the outside world in there really, and yet they do want the outside world to engage with them. They've built tourist resorts, well, that sort of thing. Kim Jong-un sends his sister to the Winter Olympics. He meets Trump and all that. So clearly they do want the world's attention, and they don't want to destroy their own country in a war. So there is somewhere in the middle there where you've got to sort of pick up on their desire to communicate more and our inability really to understand them.
What has it been like as a professional traveler and not to be able to travel this year? Do you, not meeting the public, right? Not being able to go out there and talk to people and see things. What's that process been like for you? When did you get into acceptance, if you have?
Yes. Well, it's been an odd year for me because about 14 months ago, I had to have some heart surgery. I had to have a couple of valves replaced. And so I needed the recuperation time. Right. I recovered very well and feel absolutely fine. But as soon as I sort of recovered and my feet hit the ground, wow, let's do something. Then we were into lockdown and coronavirus crisis. So I've had about a year, with a long year with a doctor's note saying Michael should do nothing. I've actually used the time quite well, and I think it's given me a chance to look back on the work I've done. And there's a lot of it, and particularly with the travel, there's a danger of it becoming a blur. You've been so many places, you can't remember this, you can't remember that. So being able to look back and have to look back because of these Travels of a Lifetime shows, which they're showing on BBC at the moment, has been very good. Look back slightly calmly rather than just adding more and more to what you're doing. I've also got, you can see in the background there, a lot of books that I've acquired over the years with all the travels. Only a small fraction of them have I actually read. So I've been reading books and watching television and things like that. And it's not been a bad process for me because of all the things I really enjoy, writing is way up there at the top. And so I've been given a chance to get some ideas for new books, and that's what I can always find something to do and something to work on. But yeah, I've been quite content with actually doing very little.
We have a related question from Christine Servando, who's a colleague of Bloomberg and a correspondent governor here at the FCC. And she asked what you've learned about humanity after your travels of a lifetime, travel correspondence. And also, when you can travel again, where would you go first and second?
What I've learned about humanity is that they say there are universal values, there are universal interests, there are universal likes and dislikes that actually aren't as enormously different as you might think. I've generally found in traveling that people are pleased to see you. They're pleased that you might take an interest in what they're doing in their lives, and they kind of want to know a little bit about you as well. I found that this happens more amongst people who have less, rather than, you know, go to the world where the, you know, very wealthy countries and very wealthy places and very wealthy lifestyles don't really want you in there because they're protecting their wealth and they feel a bit sort of twitchy about letting people in. On the other hand, I've had so many happy moments with people who are just sort of living in, you know, who aren't the richest in the world, who you would say come from third world countries. And I've always been struck by how resourceful and inventive they are. And they have to be, because they just don't have very much. They can't throw away things and say, we'll buy another one. You've got to keep it going. You've got to keep it, you've got to keep using it. And they create and build things, which I think is sort of admirable, which I mean, I'm hopeless. I can barely put a plug in a light, but, you know, I'm very impressed by the resourcefulness of the people I meet. I think the second part of the question was, where would I go if I was able to travel again? I think I wouldn't mind going to Africa, which is, I know, a huge sort of generalization, but there is something about Africa. Whenever I've been there, as soon as you arrive there, there is a different feel to it. There's something about the look, the smell, the taste, the feel of the air, and the activity going on, which I've always found exciting. And I've wanted to see more. It's such a vast continent, and West Africa I've really seen very little of. But so I'd go to Africa, or more specifically, I'd quite like to go to the Central Asia, Mongolia, and around there, and see this whole part of the world where you know, Genghis Khan and others sort of came from, where all these invasions from Central Asia into Southern Europe, into India, into China. What made them leave? Why did they, you know, what was it about living in Central Asia that made you want to go somewhere else and take it over? So I quite like to go to the Altai Mountains and all around there.
This is kind of combining a question that Chris has, as well as another Chris, Dr. Chris White. That what tips do you have for building rapport and trust with people of different cultures when you travel? Because that comes through in your books. And also from Chris White, given that you are one of the most recognizable travelers in the world, what have you learned about yourself through these journeys?
Well, the two, I'd answer the two almost together. I discovered, really, it was halfway around the world in 80 days trip, when we were on a dhow, and it wasn't the dhow that had been set up for us to take, because already things had gone wrong. We weren't able to go get a ship around Saudi Arabia. We had to reassemble at Dubai and get a dhow where most of the people didn't speak English, and we were going to be on this very simple sailing boat for at least 7 nights, 8 days in order to get from Dubai to Mumbai. And there was, you know, there's no cabins or anything like that, or first or second class. You all live on deck. You all share the same facilities. You share the same loo, which is just a barrel slung over the back of the ship. And that was an extraordinary epiphany for me, really, that journey, because I realized that there was no point in me pretending to be a presenter like Alan Wicker, or a reporter like James Cameron. I was none of those. I didn't have their qualifications. And what I was doing on the Dow was just reacting to daily life, which was something so utterly different from anything I'd ever experienced before. And also to realize that we needed them more than they needed us. They knew how to sail the boat. They knew about the currents. They knew how to avoid, you know, the mines that were floating down the Persian Gulf at that time of the previous Gulf War. So we had to listen to them and go along with them and find out things from them. And that created a sort of almost a dialogue with people who they're from Gujarat. I didn't speak their language at all, but we knew that we were literally in the same boat and had to help each other. And I found after that not to worry about trying to be somebody else. Be yourself. It may not work, it may work. And that's what really was, you know, my attitude to traveling after that was to be yourself, to be like I might be at home. I'm usually fairly open to people. I like meeting people, going around, seeing people in shops or whatever. So I would naturally talk to people. So what I did was be natural and talk to people. And no one really minded that particularly. I mean, if you got the language wrong, they knew you had a different language. So they would help you with that. And so it was that naturalness that I think, and openness, which you can't create really. It just happened to be the way I was most comfortable. I think if you feel uncomfortable and you feel awkward and you feel you have to be self-conscious about your attitudes as you travel, it's not going to work. I think you've just got to go for it. You've got to enjoy, you know, I'm a terrible cliche, I know, but the wonder of the world. And I do find it wonderful. I you know, Basil will be watching this and he'll be perhaps nodding as well. You know, we've done some very strange and wonderful things. They're not all work, but my God, they've been marvelous, sort of mind-expanding moments.
When what is your process when you write? Because your books and your travel series it doesn't seem like just a travel log, like, oh, I went here, I went there. It seems to have more meaning, and it's a story. You tell stories. What's your process for putting them together? Do you do it as soon as you get back so you don't forget, or do you let there be some time, or do you have a story concept going in?
What I have basically is my notebooks, which I take with me whenever I travel and always have done, just to note down things. And in the notebooks, there were many things that the camera hasn't seen and isn't in the show. And that's very important to me, that the books I write are my own account, a very personal story of my journey, rather than just a transcript of the shooting schedule and all that. So I have those. I usually take some tape recordings as well. Sometimes it's very difficult to scribble something down, so I use a mini tape recorder. So I've got quite a bit of information by the time I get back home. And I use that basically in diary form. There's no point in trying to, as soon as I try to make sweeping generalizations about the world and the way it should be, that never works. You're into cliche. But if you actually look at what you did that day and the fine detail, even what your room was like in an Ethiopian hotel or something like that, that's really the essence of it all. So as much detail as possible. And yes, the story, to make it into a story is important. That's why all the journeys we've done, it really is about how far we can go, how we keep going, how the days pass, what we're aiming for at the end. And I think, did he answer ask the question about what I discovered about myself?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, nothing really.
You knew everything there was.
No. I just have, I mean, what I mean is you're discovering things every day. It's not necessarily when you travel, you suddenly have this magical awareness of yourself. I think there's a feeling which I've never been able to kind of totally satisfy amongst people who like my journeys. Ask what was the moment that changed your mind? What was this? What did you discover about the world that would make us all feel better and happier, or made you feel happier? It doesn't happen like that, I'm afraid. It's just day work. But of course, there are things that go into your mind. Of course, you learn things, some of which I've talked about with you. But there's not been a moment, I think, when the light has flashed and the finger has pointed down and said, "Michael, you've got it. Remember this, okay? Here's my number, GOD1."
You're more like you're getting it, right? You're getting it little by little.
Yeah.
Well, we have a little bit of lightning round questions here, a bunch of different bits and bobs, but we'll ask them. One, I love this one. This is from Ruben Essie, or Isi. Would you take a commercial trip into space, courtesy of Richard Branson or Elon Musk, if they asked you?
Absolutely not. 100% not.
I'm glad to hear
I
that.
saw Musk or Branson on the envelope, I would put it in the bin straight away. I should not. Daring innovators, but also complete sort of egotistical maniacs. No, it's to be. Sorry, Elon, because I know Elon Musk actually is a big Python fan, and I mustn't be rude to him at all or about him, because he has told me he's a great Python fan. Loves what we do. I think it's more that I don't particularly want to go into space. I'd like to spend more time exploring the planet I'm on, really. That's just a personal thing. I know some people think it would be the best thing of all to do, but I do respect those who create opportunities for space travel. I mean, that's something that just in the human mind has got to be done. We've got to deal with that. And I think some of the documentaries, especially about the Apollo missions that I've seen recently, have been absolutely extraordinary. And somehow, and some of them are so good now, you feel, well, I've been up there.
I've gone.
Amazing pictures of our world. But I think I'd like to be there on the world, waving up at them rather than miles away, sort of trying to hold on to my toilet paper.
Joanne Anderson asks, who among the current crop of British comedians do you admire?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, there's Phoebe Waller-Bridge does can't remember. I can't remember the name of the thing she does. Fleabag. Fleabag. I enjoyed a lot. I think that was very, very good comic writing. Otherwise, I'm still very fond of people like Reeves and Mortimer and The Fast Show, which dates me rather a lot. But I miss those sort of I miss sketch shows. And I think the people in The Fast Show, Paul Whitehouse particularly, and Charlie Higson, are absolutely wonderful. They've been running them recently, so I like those. Modern comedy, I just don't know an awful lot about it, I'm afraid. Sorry about that.
That's fine. And here's one in our lightning round. Are you going to take the vaccine?
Yes, I would if it was offered. Yeah.
Yeah. You wouldn't without questioning. You think it's going to be safe?
Well, I don't know who I'd question, really.
Yeah.
The lady comes with a jab. Excuse me, is this going to kill me or not? Well, I should make you better. Oh, all right. Well, I'll have it. I just feel that, if it's been through the due processes and you respect the process it's been through and you know that it's been tested and you can't really believe that anyone would want to put anything in your arm that would hurt you or damage you, then I think I'd have to say yes. Yeah. But I mean, it's up to other people how they decide.
No,
I always say, I'm a traveler. I take every jab there is. I don't mess around saying, well, I'm not quite sure about that. Oh dear, will this hurt me? Oh, I've read on the internet that this is going to, I'll grow another head or something like that. Well, come on, make your own decision. Generally speaking, I've found I've been healthy most of my life, and I've taken all the jabs I could have.
A final question we're asking all our Zoom room participants this year is, what are you reading? And it's,
Yes.
it's holiday shopping season and people are looking for book recommendations. What books, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, stories, what have you, would you recommend? Besides your own, of course.
Funnily enough, I've been rereading Robert Graves's Goodbye to All That, because my next project is a book about my great uncle Harry, who died on the Somme, and what led up to that, his involvement in the war. And I remember I've always been fascinated by the First World War and how people wrote about it. And I remember one of the first books I ever read about it was Goodbye to All That. And I'm rereading it at the moment. And it is one of the best books about the First World War. It's good because it's also quite funny. You know, it's not endless lists of casualties and all that. It's a brilliant account of what life is really, really like in those trenches. And you get the smell and the feeling of where they are, where they sleep, where they eat. It's written by somebody who can write and write well. So that's on my list. And there's another book which I read about North Korea recently, called The Orphan. I've got it down here, The Orphan Master's Son.
It's a great book.
Johnson, was a real eye opener. I'd read quite a lot about North Korea, but this seemed to capture in the most magical way, you know, a lot of the things that disturb you about the place. Fantastic book, I thought.
Yeah, really lovely written. Well, thank you so much for this. We are just delighted. It's been delightful. And we want to invite you back the next time, you know, when we can travel, right? We want you here at the bar. You and Basil can tell your, you can tell us your stories.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you back here in Hong Kong. And we thank you so much for doing this. It's just a delight. Thank you.
It's been great, and I've had some very good times at the bar and also at the club. You know, it's been very, very a sort of little sort of bit of civilization in the heart of the world, if that is the club. And I've benefited from all the times I've been there, met some very good people. So long may you survive and flourish.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.